Before we get into today's video, as you might be able to tell, the setting is a little bit different than the usual videos. I'm at my buddy Tyler's house. You guys have probably seen him on a number of previous videos on this channel. If you are subscribed here, he has a really sweet M6, and so does his brother, E63 M6 on this side. We actually have an F13 M6 on the other side. So stay tuned, guys. Subscribe to the channel because I'll be featuring plenty of content with both of these cars in addition to the M4 content and everything else that's done here. But let us get into some of these LCI differences, shall we? I think the most visually apparent LCI update for the F8X has to be the Icon adaptive full LED headlights, as you can see right over here. These were actually introduced onto the F8X M3 and M4 as an optional piece, and I believe it was with the executive package. You would get the full LED Icon adaptive headlights included. If not, you would get the standard non-Icon headlights, which have more of a squarish kind of DRL shape to them, whereas these are more hexagonal and they have a much more aggressive look to them, in my opinion. And the DRLs themselves have sort of this 3D, almost hollowed out type look to them that make them look really futuristic and really cool. The standard non-Icon headlights actually had the housings blacked out from the factory, or maybe not blacked out, but the housings themselves were actually tinted compared to the pre-LCI non-full LED headlights, which I think definitely helped to add to the aggressive look of the front end as well. Now, making my way over to the rear end of the M4, we can see as well that all of the LCI facelifted M4s and the M3s as well got the full LED taillights, and these, in my opinion, look much nicer than the pre-LCI ones because of the fact that they are full LED. They have this nice L shape that is very traditional to a lot of BMWs in the past, and the full LED elements that kind of go throughout the taillight themselves almost give it this flowing type nature. I don't really know how to describe it. It almost looks as if there's like a liquid inside the taillight, and I just think it looks much cleaner. It looks much more premium, especially paired with those headlights as well. Now, the F80 M3 actually has a slightly different taillight design as compared to the M4. The M4 has more of, again, this L-shaped type taillight, whereas the F80 the design is a little bit different, but overall it really is the same in concept and the same technology is being used. It is also worth mentioning that the F80s from the 2016 models and upward actually got the LCI taillights, whereas the F82s didn't get the LCIs till 2018, for the 2018 model year, I should say. Now, in terms of the visual cosmetic enhancements and differences as compared to the LCI versus pre-LCI models with the F8X, that's actually about it. Literally everything else in terms of design elements are pretty much the exact same. So really, if you have a pre-LCI F80 M3 or an F82 M4, technically you could retrofit these parts if you have access to them. So if you wanted to do the headlights, you would need not only would you need the headlights themselves, but you're going to need the modules for them. You're going to need to code them in. And same thing with the taillights. The taillights don't require modules, but I do believe the LCI taillights do need to be coded in if it is a pre-LCI car. But again, like I said, really from an exterior difference, there isn't anything else that's changed up. I do think though the lighting definitely makes a big difference on the look of the car. Now, moving into the interior space of my F82 M4, as you can see, this is the secure orange merino leather interior, and if we sort of take a closer look at many of the interior design elements, this is where we'll start to see some additional LCI improvements or changes just to up the somewhat premium feel of the interior and sort of update the car in a number of ways, because obviously when you're inside the cabin of a car like this is where you're spending the majority of your time. And you know, if you're driving this car every day, which many people do, obviously those changes actually make quite a big of a difference, especially over the long run. So I think the first and most important thing to start off with is actually the iDrive unit. This is iDrive 6, which actually is a substantial change as compared to the former iDrive 5. In my opinion, the interface of iDrive 6 is actually a little bit more confusing and less user-friendly, but in terms of the options and functionality that it has, it is significantly more advanced than the previous version. And on top of that, just the UI itself has a much cleaner, more upscale and modern look to it. But again, in terms of just the way that you can navigate through everything, I would say it's a little bit more complex and it will take a little bit more time to get used to as compared to iDrive 5. But there is a lot of connected drive features, a lot of cool features and updates with the navigation, with the customization of the user interface as well. And BMW sort of switched to this tile layout as compared to just a straightforward menu, which I think has its pros and cons, but ultimately it has a better interface for the most part, and I think it definitely helps to revitalize the interior, because if the technology is up to date, well then the interior feels much more up to date as well. Now if we actually take a look at the iDrive controller itself, the iDrive controller is pretty much the same. The difference really comes in with the buttons that are used in the iDrive controller. As you can see, they are now much more flat, sort of give more of a haptic style of feedback rather than being like a physical button that you really press inward. These have a very shallow press to them, if that makes sense. It's very hard to describe, but they're just more flat, and in my opinion they feel a lot nicer with your fingers, especially when you're using the iDrive system, which is quite frequently if you're somebody that actually utilizes a lot of the functionality that it offers. Throughout the rest of the interior space, there are actually quite a few little trim updates that we see. BMW for the LCI models actually threw in a lot of electrochromatic metal trim pieces into the interior that weren't necessarily present in some of the pre-LCI models, especially around the air conditioning vents, around the HVAC like climate control unit, and actually where the window switches are, you can see these nice high quality metal or aluminum electrochromatic pieces that are really small in terms of an overall detail. I think very few people will even notice them, but ultimately they do make a big difference if you're somebody that is very meticulous about your interior space. One thing that I also wanted to mention about the iDrive unit itself is that with iDrive 6, the entire screen is actually different as compared to the iDrive 5 models. Now, with the early LCI cars such as mine, they are non-touchscreen. So mine has a build date of April of 2017. And I believe starting in August or September, if I remember correctly, of the 2017 build date year, that is when BMW actually incorporated the touchscreen iDrive units as compared to the non-touchscreen. Now, is that a deal breaker by any means? I don't think so personally. Even if mine was touchscreen, I probably wouldn't be using it because I don't want to fingerprint the screen. And you kind of have to reach over a little bit farther than what I would consider comfortable for a day-to-day drive. So I just stick with the iDrive controller. I think it is very user-friendly on its own. Adding on to some of the trim piece elements, over here where the air conditioning and HVAC controls are, there is this gloss black center trim piece as well, which was formerly incorporated onto a lot of pre-LCI cars as well. But at night now, it has a very nice ambient glow feature to it. And this was implemented much later on the M4 as compared to the F8 M3, which I believe got it in 2016 or 2017. But again, the M4s didn't get those small interior upgrades until the 2018 model years. Now, if you see over here on the back of the seats as well, we can see that the M badges actually got a little bit of an upgrade as well. Before they were metal and they just said M, that kind of illuminated at night when you would unlock the car. The problem with that was not only is the aluminum a little bit less aggressive looking, but the previous ones were extremely prone to like scratching and chipping, and many people would actually have them replaced under warranty just because of how common the failure, so to speak, was on them. Now with the facelifted models, these look much nicer in my opinion. Now the little illuminated pieces are blacked out and they do say M4. Obviously if you have an M3 it'll say M3, and if you have an M2 competition it'll say M2. So I think that's a nice little touch as well that they added, but again, just very small little differences here and there. Now if we focus our attention to the dashboard of the F82 and the F80 M3 as well, some of the F8X cars were optioned with the full merino leather, which actually basically extends the two-tone leather combo onto the dashboard, onto the tops of the door cards, and then over here on the dash where the headlight surrounds are, and then of course throughout the glove box and many other areas. And it definitely gives the interior a very upscale feeling, especially if you're going for that luxury spec on your M car. Now, if you had the LCI model, such as mine, with a non-full merino leather trim, the dashboard itself is actually double stitched, and they added this stitching visual design that kind of flows throughout the dashboard. I I think just, again, to give it a little bit more of an upscale look, which I think is nice and definitely appreciated. And the material itself of the dashboard feels a little bit softer and less plasticky, if you will, than the pre-LCI M4s. And I know this because my last M4 definitely had a very cheap feeling dashboard, especially of a car that's in the $70,000 to $75,000 price range when new. This car specifically was a little over $80,000 if I remember correctly. But again, you know, all these features are very welcome and they definitely add a nice level of luxury to the inside of the vehicle. Now, with the 4 Series LCI model, I am aware that BMW did revise the steering as well, just a little bit. I'm not sure, though, entirely if that difference was carried over into the F82 M4, and I don't think it was because, in all honesty, the steering feels pretty much identical to what was in my pre-LCI 2015 model year F82 M4. But one thing that I would like to also include that is not necessarily an LCI feature, but is a feature of some of the later build date cars, is the revised bed plate design of the S55 engine, along with the oil pan material that was used during the manufacturing process. So I believe in the December of 2015 build date and onward, if not early 2016 build dates and onward, BMW did revise the bed plate for the S55, and I think part of that was in an effort to mitigate the crank hub failures that were starting to occur a little bit on some very high-powered cars. Obviously, with an inline-6 engine, it is a big challenge to manage the harmonic dampening of the engine, especially when you have a crankshaft that is rotating so fast. And given an inline-6 configuration, you have a very long crankshaft that is being used in the engine. So part of that bracing was to, again, sort of put a damper to some of that harmonic imbalance of the engine itself. Now, there have still been cases of spun crank hubs. Again, I think it just has more so to do with your driving style and how much power you're throwing at the engine. But again, I wouldn't worry about it in the stock car, and I think it's kind of cool to know about that. It is also worth mentioning as well that with the 2015 models, the pre-LCIs, the oil pan was made of magnesium in an effort to reduce weight as best as possible. However, later on, it seems that BMW switched over to an aluminum oil pan for most of the S55 models. Now, what is the reasoning behind this? I honestly couldn't tell you. I'm not sure if it was maybe in an effort to reduce costs, or something happened with the manufacturer that they were going with, or maybe something about the stiffness of the material or the reliability of the material itself may have changed over time. But for whatever reason, a lot of the newer model M4s do come with an aluminum oil pan as opposed to the magnesium. So kind of a bummer in that sense, because it's just kind of cool to say, oh, I have a magnesium oil pan, even if the weight savings is, you know, very marginal at that. But overall, that about covers it for the LCI changes on the F80 M3 and the F82 M4. Again, this video primarily is in reference to the M4, but like I said, a lot of what the F80 M3 got for the LCI package sort of parallels the M4. So again, if you could please leave a thumbs up on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new here down below. I would appreciate that a ton. Thank you guys so much for watching, and stay tuned for some mods, guys, because the build process is going to start very soon on this car. All right, take it easy, everyone. Bye-bye.